This year, 95% of respondents said that central banks as a community will be adding more gold in the next 12 months. So I think that overall people found that the dollar will probably have a lower role, smaller role going forward in 5 years' time. Gold will have a rising role going forward. That sentiment appears to not just be higher, but also more widespread in terms of different new countries potentially adding gold too, maybe even for different reasons as well.
皆さんこんにちは。ピクテジャパンの塚本です。本日はワールドゴールドカウンシルのアジア太平洋中国を除く地域および中央銀行部門責任者シャオカイ・パンさんをお招きして世界の中央銀行の動向について詳しくお話を聞きたいと思います。パンさんどうぞよろしくお願いします。
Thank you very much for having me.
So your annual survey is always a landmark event for those of us who analyze gold market. For 3 consecutive years, central banks have accumulated over 1,000 tons of gold annually, a dramatic acceleration from the 400 to 500 tons average over the preceding decade. This suggests the structural change underway. So perhaps we can begin with the headline findings. What was the most striking result from this year's survey regarding central banks' outlook on gold?
I think in this year's survey, there were numerous findings that were actually quite striking. One of the ones that stood out is the question we ask on whether or not central bank respondents think that overall the central bank community will be adding more gold. And this year, 95% of respondents said that central banks as a community will be adding more gold in the next 12 months.
A 95% consensus is indeed a powerful signal. But there is often a difference between the official belief will happen globally and what they plan to do within their own organization. Did your survey capture this distinction?
Yes, we then asked what specifically will each central bank be doing with gold in the next 12 months? Will they be buying gold, selling gold, not doing anything? And in this year's survey, 43% of respondents said they had plans to add gold in their own institutions as well. That's also a record high. It's a full 14 percentage points higher than the previous year's survey, which was 29%, which was the previous record high. So also very, very strong sentiment among central banks to buy gold themselves.
What are the core drivers behind this historic accumulation? What did the survey reveal about the motivation of reserve managers?
I think there's many different reasons why central banks are buying gold. It probably isn't due to just one factor, but one question we ask in the survey is, why are you holding gold? What are the reasons that are important for you to hold gold? And this year, the most highly cited reason is gold's performance during times of crisis, meaning that gold does well when markets are unstable or unpredictable. And of course, if you look back at recent events that were destabilizing, like the COVID pandemic or the war in Ukraine, or right now the trade uncertainties, gold has performed well during those periods, and therefore it's done as advertised for central banks and has proven its worth as a reserve asset for central banks.
Those motivations held uniformly across all central banks, or does emerging versus advanced economy divergence?
Certainly there is divergence between the emerging countries and the advanced countries and how they view not just gold, but reserve management in general. I think for emerging market countries, which actually are the primary buyers of gold, issues that are more on their minds include inflation, global trade conflicts, I think are a little bit more important to them. Also geopolitical competition, I think, is more important to them than for advanced economies too. So beyond just as a crisis hedge, as a risk hedge, I think some countries, especially emerging countries, are looking for a way to diversify their reserve portfolios, diversify away from other currencies, and also reduce political risk to a certain extent by adding an apolitical or a politically neutral asset like gold.
What does the survey tell us about the outlook for the world's primary reserve asset, the US dollar?
So we do ask a question in the survey about how participants think the future structure of the international reserve funds will be. So I think that overall people found that the dollar will probably have a lower role, smaller role going forward in 5 years' time. gold will have a rising role going forward. They are pretty much mirror images of each other. About 75% of respondents in this year's survey thought that gold would be having a higher role in 5 years' time, and 75% thought that the US dollar would have a smaller role in 5 years' time.
That symmetry is indeed striking. And can you provide us more color on this? What is the specific reason reserve managers are so downbeat on the dollar's long-term performance?
Well, the dollar has actually been declining as a percent of total reserves for a very long time now, for over 2 decades. So it is the continuation of a long-term trend. And I don't think anybody, including us at the World Gold Council, believe that the dollar's role as the primary reserve currency is going to disappear. But I think that when you add in both long-term challenges in the US, including debt sustainability, coupled with some of the more recent challenges we've talked about, trade conflicts, less stable political outlook, I think that does give a little bit more incentive to some central banks to consider diversifying and to adding a little bit more of other assets instead.
Their central bank's gold is held on the FRB or the Bank of England still?
The New York Fed and the Bank of England are still very popular places for central banks to store gold. We asked that question in the survey, and the most popular location is the Bank of England, although I think there's actually more gold in the New York Fed than the Bank of England. So both are still very popular, but certainly the choice of where central banks store their gold has become a little bit more of something they need to put more thought into lately. One thing our survey revealed this year was that there is a very strong increase in those central banks who say that they store gold domestically as well. And that's the continuation of another long-term trend. We've seen central banks slowly repatriate some of their gold away from places like London and New York to their home country, or maybe sometimes to another third country.
So as a final thought, could you share us your findings and the message to the Japanese investors?
Absolutely. I think this year's central bank survey revealed very strong sentiment among central banks to continue buying gold, despite the fact that the gold price is quite high, and also central banks have already bought a lot of gold. That sentiment appears to not just be higher, but also more widespread in terms of different new countries potentially adding gold to, maybe even for different reasons as well. So I expect central banks to still be very large buyers of gold. Although it's impossible to predict how much gold they'll buy this year, I think that they will still be a very strong pillar of support in the gold market.
So thank you for joining this program.
You're welcome. Thank you.